talk of the town on 1320 WATR and streamed worldwide at WATR.com. Join the conversation at 203-757-1320.
Well, of course, Ed Grudy came on this program and talked about officials within the Wolcott system and that they forced his son to take off a T-shirt that was really going against the celebration, if you will, or the Dignity Day that was going on at Wolcott High School. And, that we are told by the administration some felt was disruptive of what was going on in the school. The ACLU in Connecticut has taken up the cause of this young man, Seth Grudy, and on the line with us is the legal director for the ACLU in Connecticut, Sandra Staub. And Sandra, thank you for joining us here on WATR.
Thank you. Hello.
So, let me just ask you, we have had on this program Ed Grudy, the father of Seth Grudy, and Joseph McCary, the superintendent of schools in Wolcott, and they have totally opposing views of what actually occurred. I mean, the underlying facts in this situation as it relates to whether the young man was forced to take off the T-shirt or did so voluntarily. I know the ACLU has jumped into this. Are you convinced, and I'm not certain what evidence you may have, that this he said, she said, they said, that it does come down on the side of what the young man says?
I'm convinced that the school used its authority to get Seth to stop wearing the T-shirt. And we don't have a definitive statement from the school. We received a letter last week, but not any statement as to what happened. And our basis for understanding what happened comes from Seth and his dad. And the report is that he was called into the school's principal's office and that there was more than one administrator present along with the school resource officer, and that he was told to take off the shirt. He was given a substitute shirt by the principal, and when he asked what would happen if he didn't, that he was told he'd be suspended or expelled. And so whether he was ordered to, in the express words, you have to take that T-shirt off, I imagine the school wants to have the ability to tell its students what it needs to do, what they need to do and what they don't need to do. And whether he was ordered or whether he was told he'd be expelled, it doesn't really matter at that point. The school exercised its authority to stop him from expressing himself. Okay,
now when the superintendent came on yesterday, he said that somehow, they had a nice conversation, and that voluntarily Seth decided that you're right, I'm wrong, I'll take this shirt off and I'll replace it with a Wolcott High School shirt. So I am assuming from what I'm hearing from you that you don't think in any way that was what was communicated, or that it was a persuasive, gentle conversation.
Well, I have Mr. McCary's letter to us dated June 7th, 2012, and it says nothing about that. So his only statement about that was on your show, as far as I know. And as far as I know, Mr. McCary wasn't in the room when Seth was called into the office.
And he admits that, nor was Mr. Grudy. So,
I'm going based on Seth's report, and Seth's report is that he was called in, he was told to take his shirt off, and he was given a new shirt, and he was told that he'd be expelled or suspended. So, I'm looking forward to a response from Wolcott Public Schools that doesn't get mired down in whether or not someone ordered him to take off the shirt, but rather recognizes, and this is why we wrote the letter, we are looking for Wolcott Public Schools to recognize that students like Seth have a First Amendment right while they're on school grounds. And we do not have that yet.
Okay. And I think this is an interesting situation because obviously the ACLU, and I know you have commented on this on the website, WFSB Channel 3, that the First Amendment was written to protect unpopular speech, which is naturally the kind of speech that will always need protection. So in this case, even though the ACLU has fought for a lot of the things that were being espoused or not espoused that day when it was a day of silence to kind of remember how many many kids have been held silent over the years because of their differences, that while the underlying issue that's involved here about same-sex relationships and kids being bullied because of that, while you have a certain sympathy, and Seth's sympathy is on the other side, this First Amendment right, in your view, trumps that at this time.
I think it not only trumps it, it gets us to where we want to go as a civilized society. If the school wants to teach tolerance, acceptance, and not bullying, then the school needs to accept that there will be speech in opposition to the message it's teaching, and that it must use more speech to deal with that, which is to say, teach children, not bully them into not speaking.
Yeah, that's interesting, because yesterday, Sandra, I was saying, why not engage a dialogue to try to persuade rather than reject, penalize, or deny rights? So, exactly. I mean, it seems so basic from an educational standpoint. Why is it that sometimes we who are in positions of authority might forget that or decide that we can use another methodology?
And that's precisely the reason why we wrote the letter, and we're looking to remind administrators that students need to be engaged in the dialogue that moves us forward, and that's what the First Amendment is about. It's a fundamental right, and the students have it. And we, unfortunately, at the ACLU hear stories from around the state, around the country, of schools violating that right. And so it was important for us to write this letter on behalf of Seth, even though, as we said repeatedly, we couldn't agree less with what he was saying. And we fight very hard for marriage equality and gay rights. But he has the right to speak that opinion. Okay,
now let me ask you, broadly speaking, I think a lot of us may be confused about education law. And, of course, we have certain districts that have dress codes, and I don't know whether any of that can apply here, or, say to kids that you can't have anything that describes anything. You can't have anything with writing on as a T-shirt. In other words, if a school had a policy like that said either uniforms or there's no display of anything, you can't even tell me that you like the Yankees versus the Red Sox, because that may be disruptive. Is that allowed?
Well, that's a good question. In our letter, expressly said that we, to our knowledge, Wolcott High School has no rule or policy that prohibits the wearing of expressive attire. And that would be a very different rule than to say to Seth, you can't express that viewpoint, versus if a student came in that day promoting gay marriage, they would be allowed to express that viewpoint. So one is content neutral, and the other is not. And the way the rule was applied here, it was preventing him from speaking what he wanted to say. And that's a very different rule. Okay.
So with all of this, you're now waiting, or what happens from this point? I mean, you sent a letter, they responded with a letter. Where do we go from here?
Well, the only thing we asked for in our letter was for a written assurance from the school that Seth Grudy and other Wolcott High School students will be allowed to express themselves under the protection of the First Amendment, and be allowed to wear a shirt like that or any other expressive shirt. That's not materially or substantially disruptive of the school environment, or that doesn't invade the rights of others at the school. And all we're looking for from the public schools is a letter that gives us and students that assurance, so that their speech is not, in the First Amendment terms, chilled in the future. We have students who read about this and who are afraid to speak at school, and we don't want that, and we don't think that's good for anybody in our society. So we're waiting for a letter that gives that assurance. We got a letter. It doesn't give us that assurance. So I think we have to, we've been told to, write back to the lawyer for the Wolcott Board of Education, and we will, and likely reiterate our request.
Okay. Do you see anything that would fall under this concern that the superintendent suggested, that this is disruptive speech? In other words, is there anything, he talked about, yelling fire, in a gymnasium, whatever, and we always hear, that. But I mean, when somebody sees something, I mean, are they aghast and that they, are ready to, I don't know what. I mean, I know a lot of kids get very emotional when somebody comes with a political message that may be something that works against their own belief system. I know I said if I saw somebody walking toward me with a Nazi sign or what, I mean, obviously it would upset me, but what does that mean, and what does disruption mean in this context?
I think that's a very good question, and we cited in our letter to the school, again, trying to remind them of what this means, of the decision from the 60s, where this is a Tinker decision, where, in the midst of the Vietnam War, the student wears a black armband to school, and Miss Tinker wanted to wear it to express her opposition to the war, and she was told not to. And that case went up to the Supreme Court, and reported in that decision, the United States Supreme Court noted the trial court's finding that there were hostile comments made to the student, as you might expect in the 60s, for wearing this armband. But that's not enough to say that the right is not there, that the free speech right is not there. You need material disruption, substantial disruption of the school environment, and a few comments or concerns are not substantial disruption. And again, it goes back to the notion of a civilized society where the First Amendment is paramount. We need to be able to speak in response to speech that we disagree with.
Yeah, how hard is it? I mean, you've got a society today where a lot of folks are really polarized. And, again, I said to my audience many times that if we took the viewers of MSNBC and Fox and we switched them for one night and said, this is lockdown, you MSNBC folks, you can only watch Fox, and Fox folks, MSNBC, they wouldn't even know what parallel universe, we're dealing with here. So, I mean, my question is, how hard is this? And is it getting harder because of the polarization that's going on in this society for people even to respect what the First Amendment is there to protect, and to care that rises above some of our petty partisan differences?
Well, I would hope that our public high schools would be the place where we find examples of civilized responses to speech we disagree with. And certainly examples from the leaders in the school, the principals, the school resource officers, and not the kind of bullying people into not being able to speak.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you, Sandra Staub. We will follow this case, the ACLU in Connecticut, and we'll see where this takes us, and likely have you back again to give us an update. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.